I was in the mood for like a little like 2000s pop this morning. I don't know. Welcome. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. This is Resistance Live of the 16th of April, 2024. It's day 2 of the Trump trial, and there's some really significant breaking news about the gag order. We're not quite all the way there yet, but it's pretty big, so we're going to get to that in a second. I'm really excited for it, and we have lots of other breaking news about stuff that's going on in the trial itself. All right. So as always, I'm coming to you from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a cream-colored turtleneck. My thin gold hoops are in. My hair is down. I am sitting in front of my plant and my standing lamp and my big cushy chair. And I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Big new welcome, by the way, to some of our new international viewers. I see you. I'm glad you're here. Somebody was DMing me. They were trying to stay awake in Australia. All right, so let's just get started on the gag order. So this morning, you all will remember that yesterday there was a warning from the prosecution team on day 1 of the trial that they were very shortly going to ask for sanctions concerning Donald Trump's violations of the gag order. This morning, that brief has dropped. And the brief, as predicted, makes the case that Donald Trump's posts on Truth Social late last week and over the weekend violate the gag order as expanded by Judge Merchan, I think a week ago, Monday. So this is, as we have discussed on this broadcast a lot, a step-by-step process, okay? It's not like it's kind of like an instant you go to jail kind of situation, but there is sort of a situation with that. So hold on a second. What is requested in the brief is that he is fined for each of the 3 violations, and that the judge then warns him that another violation could result in up to 30 days in jail, all right? But the format of this particular request is in the form of what's called an order to show cause, okay? An order to show cause is essentially an emergency demand that someone show up in court and prove why they should not be found liable for violating a court order. Okay. And so the language is a little bit weird because it's an order to show cause why you should not be held in contempt. That's kind of the way that it's phrased, when really what you're being asked to do is like show up and attend a hearing about the fact that you might be held in contempt. Okay. But this is like the legalese of it. It's sort of a warning. Okay. And the order to show cause that was issued by Judge Merchan here has a big stamped warning at the top of it. And the warning says, if you don't show up for court on this day, when we're having this hearing, you can be immediately arrested. So we all know that at the end of yesterday, and you all just saw this in yesterday's bonus broadcast yesterday afternoon, I encourage you to go back and watch it, that at the end of court yesterday, there were these series of discussions where Judge Merchan got very testy with defense counsel about Donald Trump not wanting to be there for certain events, right? Not wanting to be forced to show up when his case is being heard by the Supreme Court next week on my birthday. Not wanting to be there on the day that Barron graduates from high school, although apparently he never attended any other child's high school graduation ever. Not wanting to be there on Wednesdays because he wants time to campaign. And Judge Merchan was very much like, I don't know where you think you're coming from, but this is a criminal trial and you have an obligation to be here and you will be here. Sorry. So this is yet another step in a warning here, which is that, like, if Donald Trump is not in court on the day that this hearing takes place, he can be immediately arrested. Do I think there's a legitimate threat that he's not going to show up on that day? No, but it is a really interesting warning that is attached to this now. All right. So we're inching closer to the prospect of jail time vis-a-vis the gag order. And that in and of itself is a very positive development. Now, I'm going to remind everybody, the gag order hearing is set for 9:30 a.m. now on April 23rd. Okay. So that's next Tuesday, a week from today. And he's continuing to violate the gag order. We had another gag order violation late yesterday when or I guess it was yesterday at lunchtime, East Coast time, where he reposted a video from Laura Loomer attacking the judge's wife. And I would fully expect that he's not really going to be able to avoid attacking anybody who he's not supposed to attack again for a week. So we're going to have to see exactly where he sits a week from today on all of this. All right. But the escalation of potential sanctions for him for violating the gag order now is very real. He has an order from the judge that says if you don't show up on this day, you're going to be immediately arrested. And he is being asked, or the judge is being asked by the prosecution, not just to fine him for these 3 sanctions, but also to warn him that another violation could land him in the clink. So I want everybody, they moved the gag order hearing yesterday, Julie, from the 24th to the 23rd. One of the things that I want everybody to just be aware of here, as I said yesterday, is that we don't want the judge to do anything here that appears rash, because if it appears rash, it could potentially threaten any later verdict. Okay. like being upheld on appeal. So again, I said this yesterday, you can go back and watch the bonus broadcast yesterday afternoon, but everybody needs to take a deep breath and like get a little patient here, because we want this done right so that we do not end up in a situation here where we are jeopardizing the eventual guilty verdict. Okay. But very interesting developments on this overnight. And I have to say that I've read the brief, and it's really very, I mean, this is very obvious and very plain. He has quite obviously violated the gag order, and there should be some sanction in relation to it. Okay. Jury selection is continuing this morning. I warned everybody yesterday and again this morning on Threads that my expectation here is that this is going to be a very boring couple of days until this jury is sat. I'm going to remind everybody the same thing that I said yesterday on the second broadcast. This is a really critical part of our judicial process. The fact that it is boring and slow does not mean that it's not really, 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 really important. Okay, because what we're trying to do here is seat a jury that can be fair and impartial in evaluating the evidence that's being presented against Donald Trump. What's been happening so far this morning is we have now moved beyond the juror questionnaire stage for this particular pool, and we are moving into the direct questioning stage of voir dire, which is where the attorneys are allowed to ask questions of the jurors, the potential jurors rather, as they are sitting in the jury box being considered. Okay, we've already had another couple potential jurors dismissed this morning when they sort of came to the conclusion that they couldn't really be unbiased, but other jurors are being questioned, and there are some people in there who, you know, follow the news. There are some people in there who have previously dated lawyers. There are some people in there who, you know, are engaged in the news, but not every day. And we're going to have to see how this all goes. Now, I have to remind everyone that, because there were a lot of questions on the Patreon feed about this morning. Reminder, if you are not yet a paid subscriber, you can head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive. And for as little as $2 a month, you can ask me questions before every broadcast and get notified when I'm going on the air for bonus broadcasts. That might be useful to you. It also helps to support this work. But one of the things that I want everybody to just be really clear on here is that what we're most interested in is that the jurors can be fair and impartial. So the questions on the question feed this morning were like, I don't know how anybody could say they're unbiased. I don't know anybody who could say that they're fair or impartial. Okay, so I know it's really hard in this kind of heated political environment that we're in nonstop and that we've honestly been in for almost a decade now, to think that you could be fair and impartial. But I have to point something out here. This is really about whether or not a juror can consider just the evidence that is presented in the court in evaluating Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. All right. And for those of us who are lawyers, and I think for a lot of us who aren't, this would be a matter of compartmentalization, right? Being like, okay, I may have some opinions about what he's done in the past. Some of those opinions could even be strong, even though that's a question that's already been used to whittle out the pool. All right. But let's just assume that, you know, you are that person. Could you take an oath as a juror to consider only the evidence that's presented in court in evaluating whether or not he should be found guilty? I know I could do that, right? And I'm like one of the most vociferous, like anti-Trump people out there. But I also understand that the rules of our justice system require you to consider only the evidence that's presented in court. All right. So I think for some people, this might be very, very hard, and I get that. But I also think that there's a manner in which, when you look at what's being asked of these jurors, it's actually not that hard to imagine, right? That you could be someone who is asked these questions in this prospective jury pool and be like, you know what? I think I could evaluate the evidence as it's presented and determine, leaving everything else aside, whether or not he's actually committed a crime. That's all that's required. And I'm going to remind everybody, there were Trump voters on the prior E. Jean Carroll jury, and they found him liable, right, for defamation to the tune of like $100 million. So, you know, I want everybody here to just be very, very wise about, you know, the way this process works. Okay. And also, because I always find it necessary to remind people of this here, part of the point of social media and the media generally and the way that they cover all of this stuff is to make it very inflamed. All right. And when you're able to kind of like consider what this process is actually all about, this thing of, oh, it's going to be so impossible to seat a jury, actually looks not to necessarily be the case. And I'll say once again yesterday, okay, bye. I know you guys like it. Bye, Raymond. Have a nice day. I will just let you all know that one of the things that we need to do here in the way that we are evaluating the totality of this process and how it's being portrayed by the media is to understand that actually this process could move very quickly. And Judge Merchan said yesterday, as I said to everyone, this judge already thinks this process is moving too slowly. Like, he's ready to have this jury sat, and he's going to hold people to account on making sure that this trial moves forward in rapid progression, while effectively maintaining, of course, the need for the trial to be fair and impartial. So we're moving in that direction, and I hope everybody understands that it's actually not that hard to seat a jury. I mean, I know this may be a case where the argument is that because of who he is and the fact that he's a former president and the fact that he is polarizing on purpose, it would be tough. I personally think it's really kind of not. So there we go. All right, let me find this other person. Thank you all for letting me know. Bye. Have a nice day. All right. Okay, so let's move on to a couple of other things here. There were a lot of questions on the feed again this morning about the issue of people in the media saying he won't go to jail. Now, I've discussed this a lot meaning like won't go to jail if he's found guilty. I have discussed this a lot on the broadcast in the last week, and you all can kind of go back and read the broadcast. What I will just tell you, because I've been through this line by line, is that, if he's found guilty, it's anything from a fine of $1,000 all the way up to 4 years in jail time per count. Okay. And they can be served consecutively or they can be served concurrently, which means all the sentences overlap. I personally will just say again, I think that this is a matter of opinion, and nobody's going to know what the judge is going to do until he does it. Is there a possibility that he won't do time? Sure. Do I think it's likely? Personally, no. I think that if he's found guilty of multiple counts here in this context, there is a strong likelihood that he will do some jail time. But we'll see. Okay. And so I don't want anybody to be misled. And I have to remind everyone, that litigation is unpredictable. Judges are unpredictable, but I also have to tell you that I'm looking at this judge who is very no nonsense, who is out of patience for Donald Trump, who understands the gravity of what he's dealing with, who is very rigorous in the way that he's running this trial, and is kind of notorious for being like a no BS judge on this bench. Do I think he's going to be like, oh yeah, sure, you can just go home? No, I actually don't. And I think there's a lot of panic about this at this point that, make it quite unlikely at this point that there's going to be no jail time at all. All right. So that's where we are. I'm going to block this person also. All right. I want to talk for a couple of minutes about the issue of mental competency, because somebody asked me this morning, based on how all of this goes, that and also based on the fact that he was napping in court yesterday and apparently napped again this morning in court, whether or not I think he is mentally competent to stand trial. Okay, so let me just say a couple of things about this. Mental competency means something very specific when you're at trial. It means, are you capable of assisting in your own defense? It's not the same thing as an insanity defense to murder, which is a whole other standard. Okay, mental competency just means, are you compos mentis, mentally capable enough to assist your attorneys in your own defense? That's it. Okay. Do I think he's mentally competent to stand trial? Yes, because presumably he can talk to his lawyers about how his defense is going and advise them and answer questions and support them and all that other kind of stuff. Okay. So I am personally not at this point terribly worried about this. I'm just really over this right now. Okay. Bye. I'm also just going to say one other thing here. One of the things, let me just back up for a second to all of you about this issue of he's not going to do jail time, because this is really important to say. One of the things that is happening right now on social media from a disinformation perspective is there's a lot of people walking around going never going to happen, never going to happen, never going to happen. All right. And, I will just say one thing about that. One of the things that I'm going to say, you're going to. One of the other things that I'm going to say about this is that that is a form of voter suppression, and it is intentional. It is a part of disinformation now that is floating around social media everywhere. Because again, if people are cynical and bitter, and they think that there's no justice and there is no accountability, and he's never going to do jail time, why would you bother to vote? Right? So to me, one of the things that's really critically important here is that you understand that when you are repeating that nonsense from a baseless, non-lawyer perspective, you are actually engaging in voter suppression. Okay? It is not possible that there's going to be no accountability for him ever. All right. And literally, when people say this, I have to say a couple of things here about this. Okay. The first is that he's been found liable by a jury of his peers in New York City for defamation. He's been found liable by a judge in New York City for like $500 million in civil fraud. Those are two things already that are extreme accountability. He's broke. And we're going to talk about the bond in just a minute. Okay. But I also want to point out here that he's now actually on trial for 34 felonies. Like, anybody who thinks there's no accountability is like literally in defiance of the facts when they say that. Okay. So I really want people to be very, very mindful here of how you talk. Whoops. I have somebody, I'm going to hide the current comment. Sorry there. I didn't even realize that was posted. My apologies, you guys. I'm going to just make it really, really clear here that I think that if you are doing that, you are participating in suppressing the vote in a presidential election. So please, 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 unless you are a lawyer and you have a real evidentiary basis for the idea that he is never going to be held accountable, and I'm just going to say this, you don't repeat that nonsense. Just don't. Because other people are swayed by it. Social media is a contagion, for lack of a better way of putting it. One person puts it out there and other people start to believe it. All right. And that's the way disinformation works. Okay. So it's really critically important this morning that you don't do that. Okay. To go back to this point of mental competence, because I hadn't quite finished that. Yes, I think he's mentally competent. Do I think that means he's like not a malignant narcissist with sociopathic qualities? No, I think he is that, but that doesn't mean he's not mentally competent to stand trial. And an evaluation of whether or not he was mentally competent to stand trial would have to be conducted by the judge. Okay. Like, if they made an argument that he wasn't mentally competent, there would have to be a psychiatric evaluation, and that would be considered by the judge, and the judge would make a ruling on whether or not he was mentally competent to stand trial. The defense team is never going to do that. Why? Because he's a malignant narcissist. He will never admit that he's got a mental issue of any kind. Okay. So this defense is not going to take place. This defense is not going to be, we got somebody like returning on a regular basis here. I'm going to find you. Bye-bye. This troll hunting ad nauseum today, my friends. Okay. One of the things that I'm just going to repeat here, though, is that even on an appellate basis, because somebody asked about this, like, is he going to make an argument on appeal that he wasn't mentally competent to stand trial? No, he can't make that if it's not like in the basis of the facts. The moment to make that is before the trial even starts. All right. So again, this is one of those situations where I think everybody has to just like let go of like the idea that there's like an easy out right now. He's on trial for 34 felonies that could carry a prison sentence of up to 4 years each. There is no easy way out. Okay. All right. Let's talk for a second about Sandoval, because there were some questions. I talked about Sandoval last week. I'm just going to do a brief little summary of it here again, because here's one of the things that I think people need to kind of grasp about Sandoval. Sandoval is essentially a case that set a standard in criminal trials where if you are going to take the stand, you have a right to know essentially of like any bad evidence that's going to be introduced on your cross-examination. The prosecution has already sent a Sandoval notice to the defense. We talked about this last week. And one of the things that they said in that notice was that there were 13 separate judicial determinations, court determinations was the exact language, that they were intending to introduce if Trump was crossed. Okay. And there was a lot of speculation last week about whether or not these particular determinations were what we thought they were, right? Because the 13 is a lot. And, you know, we did a bunch of speculation here on the broadcast, right? It will probably be the determination that he committed civil fraud to the tune of $500 million. Defamation, because that's a character issue, right? There may be an attempt to cross-examine him on that. And that was on the basis, by the way, of sexual assault and sexual misconduct, which arguably is relevant to this case. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but they may try that. It could also be court determinations about his prior conduct. It doesn't have to be like a big ruling or a jury verdict, right? A court determination could mean a ruling on a motion, all right? So we don't know what the scope of this is. And there is supposed to be a Sandoval hearing at some point today to discuss these issues, which is why I think the prosecution came in this morning with these huge boxes. So my expectation here is that there's going to be a ruling on what can be potentially admitted on cross if Donald Trump takes the stand. But I'm also just going to tell you something else. I don't think he's going to testify. My bet is that, and we've talked about this too, because he is a pathological, malignant narcissist who cannot stop himself from lying because that's a part of his pathology. He could not just walk himself right into a perjury count, but his attorneys could be accused of suborning perjury if they put him on the stand. And also he could lie himself in the way into prison. All right. So I am just not worried about this, but that's what's going to happen in the Sandoval hearing if and when it takes place today. All right. Okay, let's talk for a couple of minutes about some other things that are going on today. So people asked me to talk about the McKesson case that was issued yesterday by the Supreme Court. Now, I have to tell you all that this is a case that has a lot of people very concerned because essentially what it has done is it has sort of, not entirely, it's kind of been a weird procedural posture. It is basically the Supreme Court saying that if you as a police officer are injured during a protest, you can sue the organizers of the protest itself. The McKesson that is mentioned in this is DeRay McKesson, who many of you may be familiar with. He's a former candidate for political office in Baltimore. He's an organizer historically for Black Lives Matter. One of the things, however, about this case is that this is a case in Louisiana. And it is under Louisiana state law. So this Supreme Court ruling was basically like the Supreme Court is not going to take this case up yet. All right. And this is the second time this has happened in front of the Supreme Court. And this opinion, by the way, was written by Sotomayor. So which gives me like a little bit more kind of like pause, right? Essentially what it said is this is an issue under Louisiana law, but we have previously been clear that negligence standards cannot be used to suppress free speech. Watch yourself, Louisiana. That's essentially what this ruling said, all right? Now, the problem with this is that at least for now, it's legal in 3 states to sue organizers of protests if you are a police officer who is injured in that protest. And that is a form of suppression, right? Free speech, right to protest, right to petition your government for change, suppression. And we're going to have to see how this all plays out going forward. All right. But it is an issue right now that has organizers and activists and people like Sherilyn Eiffel, former head of legal counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, very worried. And I share that concern, like for sure. All right. But the case isn't over. And it may be resolved in the long run on pure First Amendment basis by the Supreme Court once we're after trial. So take a breath. All right, take a breath on that one. Okay, the court is also hearing a case this morning that concerns a January 6th rioter. Now, I have to remind everybody, oral argument is not a decision. For those of you who are new here, who are not familiar with how Supreme Court procedure works. Today is merely the oral argument where either side presents their case to the Supreme Court and answers questions from the Supreme Court justices. There has been no ruling in this case. There will not be a ruling in this case until the end of June or the beginning of July at the end of the Supreme Court term for this particular year. This is the 2023-2024 term. It runs from October to the end of June. Every once in a while, we run a little bit over into the first couple of days of July when they're running late. So we will not know what the ruling is on this case until then. What this case concerns is whether or not the actions of, I hate to put it in these terms, but this is how the defense is putting it. The protesters on January 6th were actually engaged in trying to obstruct an official proceeding. Okay. Now, that is not going to impact the people who beat cops to a pulp, right? It's not going to impact the people who are bear spraying the Capitol Police. It's not going to impact the people who are engaged in violent actions on that particular day. This only pertains to the people who showed up, walked through the court, through the Capitol building and didn't really do very much. All right. But am I concerned about it? Kind of. I guess my point about this is that if the court goes the wrong way on this, those people will not be sentenced on the basis of the issue of obstruction. So it could result in some lower sentences for January 6th insurrectionists. I have to tell you that Gorsuch and everybody else on the conservative bench is, making a predictable stink this morning, right? They're referring to them as violent protesters and the like. One of the things that I do want people to be very mindful about here, though, is that sometimes in the process of asking questions in front of the Supreme Court, the way that this goes is that Supreme Court justices will ask certain questions that they themselves are trying to find an answer to, or that they are trying to convince their colleagues to come on board with in the context of what their particular position is right now. So oral arguments, particularly in terms of how we tea leaf read the justices, are an art form. And not necessarily a given on how the court is going to end up ruling. Okay. So we'll have to see how this one goes. Again, I don't think anybody should be panicking about this. It does potentially impact Trump's charges in the district court for the District of Columbia because he is charged with conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, but that's only one of the counts. All right. The other stuff is like conspiracy to interfere with rights, which is the rights of 80 million Americans who voted for Joe Biden. So there's other counts that he could be convicted on. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. Okay. Final point for today. Okay, sorry. That's my favorite giggle that so many of you like so much. Mike Johnson may not be the speaker before too long. So many of you asked after the entire fiasco last fall of like, oh, it's going to be Jim Jordan. Wait, Kevin McCarthy is out. Who's Matt Gaetz going to endorse now? Blah, 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 where we landed on Mike Johnson at the end. One of the things that stayed in place for that was that a single representative can throw the speaker's position into jeopardy by putting a vote on the floor of the House to remove the speaker. Okay, so this morning, that Marjorie Taylor Greene has already done that. This morning, Thomas Massie, also part of the like ultra far right white nationalist wing of the GOP, has said that he will also back the removal of Speaker Johnson. I'm going to remind everybody that means that in the event that there is a vote, Johnson is out unless 3 Democrats come on board to save his speakership. Which, by the way, leans us kind of in favor, again, of the prospect of Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. I have to say, I know everybody's very worried about Ukraine aid. Everybody's very worried about various forms of aid that are currently on the table. And Mike Johnson did say last night that he was going to put a bill on the floor of the House for additional foreign aid. All right. And that's the right call. I don't agree with Mike Johnson on much, but that's the right call. Okay. That is apparently the thing that has tipped Massie over to trying to get Speaker Johnson ousted. Now, is it a good thing to have the speakership in limbo while, there is a dire need for aid to Ukraine? No. Okay. But on the other hand, chaos in the GOP leans very heavily in favor of them being voted out of office in the House and everywhere in November. All right. So we're going to let them do what they're going to do. And the results will be what they will be. But I just have to point out that the GOP has no leadership. They have no form of government. They are not ever doing any work that truly benefits the American people. They are simply taking orders from their orange god, who is currently falling asleep in a courtroom in New York City, facing down 34 felony counts that may land him in prison for the rest of his life. Okay, so we will see what happens next. And I will remind everyone here that when your enemy is in the process of self-destructing, you do not intervene. Okay? I'm going to remind everybody here, because I haven't said it in a really long time. If you're very up in arms right now about everything that's happening, or even if you're not, I got to remind everybody here that like right now we have 2,524 people on this broadcast. In addition to the fact that you should like and subscribe it, please get involved where you live, because literally if everybody who's watching this broadcast right now committed to getting 10 voters out to the polls in November, that's 25,000 people being mobilized, right? Whether that's disaffected or disenchanted voters or your neighbors or your friends or your family, that's a number that actually like changes elections. And this is a year where like there's a huge opportunity to really remake America in a much more equitable and fair manner, because the GOP is like all in for Trump and people are sick of it. Right? So this is a year where you've really, really, really got to get involved. Become a poll worker, volunteer to do election security work, canvass your neighbors, sign up for a campaign that you care about, even if it's just for like the school board or the city council. Do the work of working to get out the vote, because like seriously, voting alone is not enough this year. What we need is a total wipeout. And we need something that's going to like demonstrate for all time that the GOP is done. The only way that that happens is if every single one of us gets involved. And we have to take back the House. Those of you who are asking questions about like, why was Clarence Thomas not on the bench yesterday? Well, he is today. But the only way he ever gets removed is if we take back the House, because he can't be removed unless he's impeached, and impeachment starts in the House. So there's a critical need for everyone here to really get involved this year. And I really urge you to do it. Also, reminder, you want to ask me questions, or you just want to support this work because I'm helping you out every day, please become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. It's as little as like under a dime a broadcast. You can subscribe for as little as $2 a month, and it goes all the way up to $100 if you care to kick me some extra cash. But think of it as a donation for this work. This is a lot of work on our part, both for me and my team behind the scenes. By the way, they're the folks who answer DMs on Patreon. So if you reach out to them with a technical issue, that's how you're going to get them. But I will just mention to everyone here that like, Your support on Patreon is what keeps this broadcast alive. So if I'm helping you and I'm talking you off the ledge, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. And then you get to ask me questions, and you also get advance notice if I'm doing a bonus broadcast on a given day during the trial. All right, that's it for today. I am going to just say goodbye to this person. Like, we've just had so many trolls today. It's wild. I guess we're doing the right thing. I will always kind of take that as a sign. All right. And all of you are scrolling by, and I can't even get this fellow. Here we go. Bye. All right. I will catch you all here live tomorrow at regular time. Sorry, I've got Amy White up there with the hearts, but I appreciate you. I'll see you all tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, if not before. I doubt there's going to be a need for an emergency broadcast today, but you never know. So we'll see. And I will catch you all here very, very soon. And I'll be live online on Threads throughout the day as I am able with my other responsibilities for the rest of my job. All right. I'll catch you all soon. Thanks for being here. We love your support. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up and drop me a comment if you're watching this on the replay, and let me know how you're doing. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.